Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Lee, and for my final project, I decided to do a policy that is on the federal level, but how it has been implemented or the lack thereof in the state of New Jersey. Um, that policy is the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And the reason I chose this is because my oldest child has an intellectual disability. And when I moved with him to the state of New Jersey from Pennsylvania, he entered into first grade. And we went from his kindergarten in Pennsylvania being a self contained classroom within a general ed public school to the school district assigning him to a private school specifically for children with disabilities. And I fought this. He was originally in a regular public school, and after 2 weeks, they told me that they could no longer accommodate him within the district, so they wanted to send him to a private school. Um, and that's not quite how the law works. So, um, but I fought it and eventually decided that I would prefer him just to be with a teacher that respected him and didn't view him as a burden. So we did move him to the private school, the separate segregated school. So my final project has to do with um, the issues that New Jersey has with this IDEA policy. Aha, okay. Let me move my guy over here. What is IDEA? So, just a quick overview. Signed into law in 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act is a law that guarantees a free and appropriate education, otherwise known as FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, LRE, to students ages 3 to 21 with disabilities. This education is provided at no cost to the parent, um, and they are every school district, every school is required to accommodate a child with a disability. Since 1975, amendments have been made to emphasize access to the general education curriculum, um, so that more children are receiving a more inclusive education, as well as access to early intervention services for children ages birth through 5 until they go to kindergarten. My child did receive early intervention services as well. Um, and the U.S. Department of Ed reported in 2018 and 19 more than 64% of children with disabilities are in general education classrooms, 80% or more of their school day. And early intervention services are being provided to more than 400,000 infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. Early intervention is really interesting. They actually have therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, sometimes speech therapists, who come to your home and provide these services in your home. Yeah. FAPE, the free access to public education, also includes access to related services. So these are the same services provided in early intervention, such as occupational, physical, and speech therapy. These services and their frequencies are documented in what we call an IEP, or an individualized educational program. This IEP is renewed every year. They have and if you request an evaluation for your child, and they decide that they need an IEP, they have 30 days to um, plan out the IEP and a meeting is held and you agree to it or don't agree to it, and those are the services and the education they are responsible for providing your student. Um, and here is really where it gets interesting in New Jersey. So IDEA requires that children be educated in the least restrictive environment, LRE, possible given their individual needs. This means that they must have the opportunity to interact with and be educated with children who do not have disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. There is a lot of wiggle room here, and a lot of states do their best to provide the least restrictive environment possible, for a number of reasons, and New Jersey does not. Um, just a little background of IDEA and special education in New Jersey. Interestingly enough, in 1911, New Jersey was the first state in the United States to require education in public schools to students who are blind, deaf, or cognitively impaired. Um, Dr. Dan Ringelheim, around in the 40s and 50s, was the director of the New Jersey Department of Education Office of Special Education, and he actually moved to chair the National Advisory Committee on the Handicapped in 1966 and went on to construct legislation for what would eventually become IDEA. So, a few things. New Jersey, interestingly, has higher instances of necessary special education services. So, in 2005, just a little statistic, approximately 9% of all students in the US receive special education services under IDEA, while in New Jersey, 11% of all students receive these same services. And conversely, in 2006, approximately 96% of all students with IEPs were educated within their home district. Only 91% of the same population was educated within their home district in New Jersey. Um, so they have a 5% gap there from the rest of the United States. And from Oberti versus the Board of Education, the fact that a child with disabilities will learn differently from his or her education within a regular classroom does not justify exclusion from that environment. A few statistics on inclusion. In 2014, 62% of students with disabilities nationwide were educated in a general education classroom for more than 80% of the school day. And that's how IEPs are generally structured. Um, they determine a placement. So my child spends less than 10% of his school day within the general education classroom because he is in a segregated school. Um, some children can spend between 20 and 40% of their school day in a general education classroom. This could mean things like specials, art, and music. Um, some children spend between 40 and 60%. So maybe they go to a resource room for an hour a day, or they're pulled out for therapies, however much, and then 80% of the school day they're actually within that general education classroom and they're only pulled out for therapies. Um, so, in the same year, 2014, only 44% of students with disabilities in New Jersey were educated in a general education classroom for more than 80% of the school day. That's a big difference. Um, and New Jersey is not a large state. New Jersey is a very small state, and we have both a higher instance of students with IEPs, and a lower instance of them being integrated within their home district. And just a little interesting international fact, in the same year, 99% of students with disabilities in the country of Italy were educated in a general education classroom for more than 80% of the school day. Um, so, and then according to a 2018 report, states with the lowest rate of including students with disabilities within that general education classroom, at least 80% of the school day, New Jersey is at the very bottom of that list. We only Hawaii has a lower rate of inclusion than New Jersey, followed by Montana, Illinois, and Arkansas. And so here, why are inclusion rates so low in New Jersey? Um, you'll get a lot of answers to this question. Segregation is argued to be better because there's and this is what I was told when my child was moved out of district, because there's a greater opportunity for smaller class sizes, more individualized support and attention, and lower instances of bullying. Now, the smaller class sizes, more individualized support and attention, that is actually guaranteed under IDEA anyway, and they are required to provide that individualized support regardless. That is not actually a um, determining factor for moving them out of district. Um, an assumption that students require more intensive services that legitimately require more restrictive program features, such as alternate educational placements. This could be something like a child has significant behavioral issues and needs to be in a space that is ready to de escalate conflict regularly. Um, Perhaps there aren't as many stimuli around to spur hostile action. Um, there are more people around to handle the student should they act out. Now, and additionally, New Jersey has a highly fragmented school district system, and I wrote about this in my policy brief. Um, that the municipality issue in New Jersey affects the school districts as well. So there are 555 districts, school districts. And again, New Jersey is about 2.5 hours long and about an hour wide. It is a very small state. And we had 555 districts. That means 555 superintendents, 555 different um, structures for attending to students with disabilities. Several of these districts have one school within the district and fewer than 100 students. I included this interesting graphic here because going back to um, the school districts not being able to provide more intensive services within district or more individualized support. It's interesting to note looking at this that New Jersey on the whole is spends a significant amount more per student than the rest of the US does. Only two school districts there, looks like Allentown, and I'm not really sure where that other one is, but are along the national average. My district is one of the dark green districts. Um, some benefits of expanding inclusive education. So there are a variety of stakeholders affected if more students were to be included within a general education setting within their home district even. So the legislators who design legislation will be at less of a risk for legal actions by parents if they're adhering to IDEA policy. A number of cases have been brought against the New Jersey Department of Ed, stating that they are, in fact, violating IDEA. And you heard it here first. I may be one of them in the future. Um, Additionally, taxpayers will not bear the burden of funding tuition for out of district placement. So here's a fun little link. Tuition rates for special education private schools. This is per these tuition rates are per student and are paid by the sending district. So my district um, pays a tuition for my child to attend an out of district school. His district is not included on this chart, but they write about the average line here. So on the right here is the projected school year tuition rate. Um, you see this is higher than most colleges. We have in the 50s, 60s. Here's a budget friendly option. Um, my child's school is about $59,000 a year to attend, and that does not include transportation. Transportation is um, an additional cost on the part of the taxpayer. These are our school tax dollars that are paying for these children to attend schools out of district. And while I absolutely personally believe it should be a choice, I think there are plenty of um, students who function better in a segregated setting. I believe that should be a option provided to parents. Um, I don't think it should be compulsory, like in my case it was, and in a few um, other cases I know of personally. Um, so yeah, that's a very pricey. And just as a side note, this is just interesting. I am actually paid to transport my son, um, rather than him take. It's cheaper for the district to pay me rather than pay a transportation company to transport him. And I'm paid about $15,000 a year to transport him. Anyway, that is off topic. Okay. So close this. Never mind. Okay. Um, Additionally, parents do not have to make accommodations regarding things like work schedules or their other child's schooling, should their child attend an in district school just like everybody else. There also is generally more collaboration among the general education, special education teachers, and their administrators. There are a few districts within New Jersey that do co teaching, is what that is called, and have reported a lot of um, wonderful collaboration there. The children, what benefits do they see from a more inclusive education? All students develop a greater sense of community and belonging. Students with disabilities, in particular, learn how to connect with the general community at a very important age to do so. Students without disabilities garner higher levels of tolerance and empathy. Students with disabilities learn to model age appropriate behavior from their typically developing peers and learn at greater rates, faster rates. They have equal access to curriculum, and this is something that was implemented by IDEA amendments. Um, but many times the students' receptive abilities are underestimated, and access to a general education curriculum presumes greater competence and allows for a greater range of academic exposure. In a study done on inclusive education in Florida public schools, Dr. Kim Kelly found higher rates of academic achievement among both general education and special education students. My policy recommendations. The New Jersey Department of Education must set specific goals to reduce the number of students in segregated schools. These goals must also include methods of observation to ensure goals are being met. Um, School districts must set goals towards greater inclusion of special education students within the general education classroom. More school districts must implement co-teaching classroom environments and hire additional special education instructors within the district to teach included special education students within the general education classroom. That sounds like a lot, but the problem really is twofold. New Jersey school districts generally don't um, accommodate students in district at all, even in self-contained settings. Um, and that I believe is a first step towards integrating these students with and without disabilities. They also um, don't provide any sort of inclusive experience in general. Again, some school districts do. Um, so here they must work towards providing a more inclusive setting aside from being in the home district school. Um, New Jersey Department of Ed must perform outreach efforts among parents to educate them on the advantages of special education students being included within their home districts and, in some cases, within a general education classroom. This is important because parents, um, particularly in New Jersey, believe that private education um, is the best of all, and that comes to special education as well as general education. Um, and that's not always the case. And there, I believe, an effort must be undertaken to um, provide the benefits of inclusion to parents so they understand that as well. Provide additional professional development for instructors, caseworkers, and administrators on inclusion and special education practices. Um, that speaks for itself. Create plans within the IEPs to transition students back into a contained home district program or a general education classroom. A lot of these students have been in segregated schools their entire educational career, and a lot of these students do not um, handle transitions well or appropriately, and will need to develop plans to work in their best interest as well. Conclusion: New Jersey has a higher rate of special education students than the national average and allocates fewer resources toward accommodating them within their home district. This is both a segregation and spending issue. The amount of money that is wasted on sending these students to private school districts that don't necessarily need that kind of accommodation is astronomical. And New Jersey has a very high cost of living and a very high property tax rate as it is. So, not to mention the segregation issues. New Jersey Department of Ed must develop actionable goals to remedy the burden on students and taxpayers while also providing support for teachers and administrators to implement these changes. Um, here are my references. There are a lot of them. And thank you so much for coming to my non TED Talk, and I hope you enjoyed.